For some of us tend to one thing, some to another, and this will be recognizable from the pleasure and the pain we feel. We must drag ourselves away to the contrary extreme, for we shall get into the intermediate state by drawing well away from error, as people do in straightening sticks that are bent. This is advice on morality. You know, it's frustrating how far off he is sometimes, and just goes on and on about stuff. He could cut a lot of this stuff with his golden mean business. Now, in everything, the pleasant or pleasure is most to be guarded against, for we do not judge it impartially. We ought to, then, to feel towards pleasure as the elders of the people felt towards Helen, and in all circumstances repeat their saying, for if we dismiss pleasure thus, we are less likely to go astray. It is by doing this, then, that we shall best be able to hit the average, by trying to go away from the pleasures, the things that we are most drawn towards. But this is no doubt difficult, and especially in individual cases, for it is not easy to determine both how and with whom and on what provocation and how long one should be angry. For we also sometimes praise those who fall short, and we call them good-tempered. But sometimes we praise those who get angry, and we call them manly. The man, however, who deviates little from goodness is not blamed, whether he do so in the direction of the more or of the less, but only the man who deviates more widely from the good is blamed, for he does not fail to be noticed. Sticks out like a sore thumb, right? But up to what point and what extent a man must deviate before he becomes blameworthy is not easy to determine by reasoning. You need evidence from reality, case-by-case situation, any more than anything else that is perceived by the senses, right? You can't figure it out just without information from the senses. You have to have the sensory input. Such things depend on particular facts, and the decision rests with perception. So much then is plain, and the intermediate state is in all things to be praised. Wait a minute. Wouldn't we want to take the intermediate path and not praise it in all things? Why praise it in all things? We should praise it in none? Should we praise it in all? Let's praise it some of the time. Let's take the intermediate path, huh? But that we must incline sometimes towards the excess, sometimes towards the deficiency, for so shall we most easily hit the mean and what is right. Take it if you will. On to Book 3. Since virtue is concerned with actions, to distinguish the voluntary and the involuntary is presumably necessary for those who are studying the nature of virtue, right? So we have to, if we're going to study virtue, we have to study what is really up to people's choice and what isn't. And if it's not up to their choice, if they couldn't really have chosen, then we don't put that in the category of virtuous or whatever. There are other categories and other ways to describe that. A virtue is chosen, so now we have to look at different things and figure out a little bit about what it means for something to be chosen or not chosen, voluntary or not. Was it forced on you? Did it just happen in you? Was it just in your genes or something, so to speak? Or maybe you were insane, temporary insanity even, or maybe you were drunk when you wrecked a car, and so you didn't really mean to wreck the car, but you shouldn't have got behind the wheel drunk. And what is voluntary, right? I don't think he's going to go over drunk driving, but let's continue. So to distinguish between these is presumably necessary for those who are studying the nature of virtue, and useful also for legislators with view to assigning both of honors and punishments. Okay? That's a weird detail for him to throw in there, but remember, freedom from government and privacy is as new as anything. You know, it's a very new concept, and back in ancient Greece your life was owned by the state, so you really did think in terms of the city you lived in and stuff. It was really a very important concept in your mind in the time of Aristotle. So those things then are thought involuntary, which take place under compulsion or owing to ignorance. Okay, if things are owing to ignorance, if you didn't know, then we would consider that involuntary. Now that right there is the excuse for youth. As Peikoff said, and as Ayn Rand said, Ayn Rand, surely I guess we can give primary credit to, because she did say that you can't blame the young for, you know, philosophical things they preach when a kid's 14, whatever he's preaching. You know, give him time, tell him to read a good book or two. If somebody's 50 and they're preaching that stuff, then you can really morally blame them. But the youth have ignorance as their excuse for everything that they do. There's the reason to limit the voting age, but I don't know if we should stop it at 18. Maybe 16's okay, maybe 20's better. But the real key about the age of voting, just since you mention it, is that whatever age we put the vote at doesn't really matter too much, as long as the things that they vote on and the laws that they pass and the people they put in office cannot violate your rights. You know, if we change the government so that it can violate our rights whenever it wants to, then it's not going to matter what age our electorate starts at, 16 or 18 or 20. So these are issues that can be argued and debated and whatever, but in the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how old the age of voting and the age of legality and stuff are, except to say that youth are ignorant. We don't have to punish them for it. This is involuntary on their part, as we might say from Aristotle. They are ignorant, though, so we can't do what a guy on YouTube, Aaron0883, he would put the voting age at 2 or 6 or something. You know, insanity. Presumably, he would put the voting age when the kid's born. I don't know. You can't tell what these people would do, but that's the reason there's no objective place to put it. It's just something that has to be decided. It's not the most important thing in the world. Okay, so those things are thought involuntary if they owe to ignorance, and that is compulsory, of which the moving principle is outside. It's a compulsion on you if the moving and deciding principle is outside of you, being a principle in which nothing is contributed by the person who is acting or is feeling the passion. So let's say you're commanded to do something and you're a slave, and so you do it for that reason. That's different, and so we would say that that's compulsion, right? You did it not from something in you and from your willpower, but from a response to something outside. Fine, we skip a sentence there. Next paragraph, but with regard to the things that are done from fear of greater evils, or from some noble object, for example, given if a tyrant were to order one to do something base, having one's parents and children in his power, and if one did the action, they were to be saved, but otherwise would be put to death, right? So if you're put in a terrible situation, you're forced to act on circumstances forced on you, it may be debated whether such actions are involuntary or voluntary. Now, there's a terrible movie called Saw, I think, where they do terrible things, like they put a key, surgically opened the guy up and put a key inside and closed it, and then they overdosed him on heroin, and then they put a trap on a lady's face, and it was going to close and kill her, and she had like 20 minutes to use her bare hands to get into the guy's intestines, find the key, and stop the trap from closing. Don't ask me. That's like the only horror movie I've watched in 12 years. No, I don't like horror movies. I don't watch them. The last one I watched was Friday the 13th or Freddy Krueger or something. And the next one I watched is not on my list. But anyways, did she commit mutilationary murder on purpose? Did she do it voluntarily? Is it something that we could later on say, you shouldn't have done that, you had to let yourself be killed with the mask closing on you? Sick and twisted, but Aristotle could be used to address the movie. So something of the sort happens also with regard to the throwing of goods overboard in a storm. He has his own example, different from my horror story example. In a storm, you know, things get thrown overboard to prevent the boat sinking.